Hello everyone, today I'm going to be exploring the issue of free national health care, an issue that has been the center of attention in many countries for many years, and more importantly, we'll be looking at what different philosophical perspectives actually have to say about it. So, when we really think about healthcare, we don't just think about the systems or policies. We see whether it connects to deeper ideas about human life, fairness, and responsibility, often questioning things like, what do we actually owe each other as members of a society, or should something as essential as national healthcare be dependent on a person's financial situation? So to explore this, I want to look at 5 different perspectives, and at the end and in between we'll connect these ideas to different examples and just share my own perspective at the end. Let's start with Aristotelian ethics first. Aristotelian ethics is a perspective that is really big on one idea: living well and reaching your full potential, or what Aristotle actually calls eudaimonia. When we apply Aristotelian ethics to healthcare, it becomes more than just treating its illness. It's actually a basic condition for living a good life. Because if somebody is dealing with constant illness or stress from medical cause, it becomes much harder to develop qualities like courage, responsibility, or even good judgment. Aristotle believed that a good life is about balance. So when we think about healthcare, we can see it as the middle ground between 2 extremes. One side where people are completely neglected, and the other where people become unsustainable, or the system becomes unsustainable. A balanced system, however, supports people without collapsing under pressure. A good example of this is when a society aims to practice justice, making sure people aren't unfairly excluded, or compassion without going to extremes. As Aristotle stated in his book, The Nicomachean Ethics, the end of the medical art is health, that of a ship building a vessel, that of victory, that of economic wealth. If the purpose of medicine is health, then limiting access goes against that purpose. We can see this idea in big practice with the National Health Service of the United Kingdom that was founded in 1948. Basically, after World War II, there was a strong public support for a system that would care for everyone, and around 90% of people supported the idea of a welfare state. Aneurin Bevan, the founder of NHS and the Minister of Health at that time, saw healthcare as a moral responsibility, something that reflects the character of a society, and even though critics called it socialized medicine, the NHS became a clear example of a system founded on collective flourishing rather than just profit. Next, I want to take the perspective of utilitarianism. This perspective was developed centuries ago by Jerome Bentham and later refined by John Stuart Mill, and it focused on one main idea: the greatest good for the greatest number. Bentham approached this very mathematically, using something called the hedonistic calculus, where he tried to measure pleasure and pain based on things like how strong it is, how long it lasts, and how many people it actually affects. That last part, how many people it actually affects, is essentially and especially important when we talk about healthcare and utilitarianism itself. Because free healthcare doesn't just help individuals, it impacts the entire population. Think about it. Free healthcare, people being treated without cost, lessens the need for keeping the disease to yourself. Mill later added an important distinction between lower pleasures like physical comfort and higher pleasures like intellectual and moral good. And realistically, people can't pursue those higher aspects of life if their basic health needs aren't met. Utilitarianism also splits into 2 approaches: act utilitarianism, which focuses on individual situations, and rule utilitarian, which focuses on systems and long-term impact. And in the long run, a system like free healthcare tends to create a healthier, more stable society, focusing on systems and long-term impact. As Mill stated on his book on Liberty 1859, a person may cause evil to others not only by his actions but by his inactions, and in either case he is justly accountable to them for the injury. So choosing not to provide access to healthcare can itself lead to harm. Now let's look at Kantian ethics. This perspective, developed by Immanuel Kant, is a duty-based theory also known as deontology. Instead of focusing on outcomes, Kant focused on intentions and moral rules. He believed that morality came from something called a categorical imperative, which is a principle that asks, can this action be applied universally? So in this case, we might ask, can we accept a world where only the wealthy receive health care? That's the idea. And if that idea can't be applied fairly to everyone, then it fails morally. Kant also talks about treating people as ends in themselves, not as tools or means to something else, stating in his work, Groundwork of Metaphysics of Morals, what has a price is such that something else can also be put in its place as its equivalent. By contrast, that which is elevated amongst all price and admits of no equivalent has a dignity. This highlights the difference between things that can be bought and human beings who have intrinsic worth. If healthcare becomes purely about profit, people risk being treated as means, but providing care respects their dignity. Kant also believed that only things that is truly good is a good will, which is the genuine desire to do the right thing. So from this perspective, providing healthcare isn't about results or efficiency, it's about acting out of a moral duty. Let's take a shift here. On the other hand, there are philosophical perspectives like Kantian ethics, which supports it and talks about acting on or out of moral duty, while on the other hand, ethical egoism takes a very different approach. Ethical egoism is a theory that argues that people are morally obligated to act on their own self-interest. It's important to separate this from psychological egoism, which says that people do act selfishly. Ethical egoism instead says that people should act selfishly. Philosophers like Ayn Rand supported this idea strongly. She argued that altruism, which is putting others first, can actually deny the value of an individual because it treats a person's life as something to be sacrificed. As she stated in one of her articles by the Ayn Rand Institute, a right does not include the material implementation of that right by other men. From this perspective, healthcare isn't something you're given, it's something you earn. Ethical egoism supports self-interest, but not foolishness. Even thinkers like Thomas Hobbes with the social contract pointed out that if everyone only acted for themselves without limits, society would become unstable in what he called the state of nature, brutish, short, and nasty. So even from a self-interest perspective, supporting healthcare systems can make sense because they prevent the spread of disease, keep the workforce functioning, and maintain social responsibility and stability. So while ethical egoism challenges free healthcare, it doesn't completely reject its practical benefits. And finally, Christian ethics. This perspective is grounded in the Bible and the idea of the Imago Dei, that all humans are made in the image of God and therefore have inherent worth. Healthcare, then, is not just a service, it is a way of respecting human dignity. The parable of the Good Samaritan reinforces this. The story goes as so. The Samaritan helps a wounded stranger without questioning cost or obligation, demonstrating selfless love or agape. There's also the idea of stewardship, that people are caretakers of their bodies. If individuals are unable to care for themselves due to the lack of access, then society is failing in its responsibility. And finally, the option for the poor, the belief that a society is judged by how it treats its most vulnerable. As Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 6 verse 19 to 20, or do you know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit within you? So glorify in God in your body. This reinforces the moral importance of care. A more recent example of this is the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, signed in 2010. This law attempted to expand access while maintaining a private system. President Barack Obama framed it in moral terms. Healthcare is not a privilege, it is a right. It reflects an attempt to balance competing values, individual freedoms, and collective responsibility. So, when we bring all of these perspectives together, a clear pattern starts to form. Aristotelian ethics emphasizes what human flourishing. Utilitarianism reduces suffering. Kantian ethics highlights dignity. Christian ethics call for compassion, and all of them in different ways support the idea that healthcare should be accessible. Ethical egoism challenges this but still recognizes its benefits. Personally, I believe healthcare should be accessible to everyone, and not just because it improves society, but because it reflects human value.